Hi, folks.
Good noon, everybody.
No,
Yay, look at y'all's faces.
So nice to see you both.
good to be here.
Wesley just found a glitch on our website and supported us to fix it. So thank you, Wesley. I don't know if you can hear us. It looks like maybe you're frozen.
The new website looks awesome though, even
Thank
if it's
you.
got glitches.
We're getting lots of good feedback, and I
Yeah,
feel I feel like it looks great.
yeah.
And
It
more
feels
importantly,
very,
it works great.
that's
And
a
when
big
there's
thing.
glitches, it's really easy to go in and fix them, which is what happened today.
That's awesome.
I'm gonna put Wesley back in the waiting room and see if that helps. Hi, Kayla. Welcome. We get started in 1 minute. Oh, there you are. You're back, Wesley. You were frozen for a while. Can you hear us? Oh, you're muted. There you go.
Okay, there you go. All right.
We solved the website issue that you found, so thank you for that.
Yeah, I was like, oh my goodness. Then I realized it. And I said, okay, I got to switch my 10 to 12 so I can come thing at 12. Okay, but we are here.
All right, and welcome, Dallas. All right, I think we have enough of a critical mass to get started, and we're,
Mhm.
we're recording our small talk as we go, so we might as well jump right in. But thank you all for being here. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, oops, actually, I'm sorry, I didn't do presenter mode. Give me just a moment. Okay, can you see just my slides now?
Yep.
Okay, beautiful. All right. Um, let's see, we're gonna get started with our Food Justice Fund info session. Um, and just to run through the agenda, so we'll introduce ourselves, Micah and me will introduce ourselves briefly. Then we'll go through an overview of what the Food Justice Fund is and what community grant making is for SOFSA. Then we'll talk about the current opportunity, the 2026 funding opportunity, and really walk through the grant application. We'll talk about key dates and then we'll open it up to any questions you all have. This session is being recorded and will be posted to our new website and FAQ tomorrow. So just briefly, hi all, I'm Maura Ackerman. I'm one of the co-founders of SOFSA and the executive director. I also am one of two, along with Micah, staff members who sit as one of the co-facilitators for this year's Food Justice Fund Leadership Council. And Amy Tao, who is a former grantee and an alum of the Food Justice Fund Leadership Council, is one of our other co-facilitators. And below are Hillary and Mercy and Gabby and Josephine, who are the Leadership Council members who are actually making the determinations and decisions for this year. And I'll let Micah introduce themselves and take it away.
Hi, all. As many of you know, I'm Micah Orieta. I'm the Food Systems and Network Building Organizer with SOFSA. And like Maura mentioned, I serve as a co-facilitator for the Food Justice Fund, which means we try to have no influence over the decisions and just provide folks with information and guidance and clarifying questions so that they are empowered to use their own expertise and knowledge and wisdom to guide this process. And it's been really awesome. For last year's group of facilitators, this year's group of facilitators are all just like a bunch of super community minded, involved folks. So it's great to connect with them, and it's great to see what they think about how we run this program and what we can do to improve it. And with that, let's get into it. So, like Maura said, we're um, just going to go through and share information with y'all about the Food Justice Fund. I do want to plug that on the website in the Food Justice Fund page, there is an FAQ you can click through for a bunch of questions. And I think that a lot of what we'll cover today is also reflected there. So if after this you have things that you don't quite remember, you can go look there in addition to looking at the video recording. Okay, cool. You can go to the next slide. So the Food Justice Fund is so cool. We love it because it does a lot of work for the food justice movement locally. It doesn't just provide direct resources to community-led projects, but it also starts conversations locally and gives visibility to existing and emerging process, whether they're funded or not, and then allows us to connect emerging projects with funding sources beyond just those provided by the Food Justice Fund. It also helps us at SOFSA keep a pulse on what is emerging throughout Onondaga County, Onondaga Nation, and the city of Syracuse in terms of who is leading projects, what projects are taking root, and the kind of support needs that are spread throughout the community. And critically for us, it allows us to live out our mission of transformative justice and community resourcing by giving us a concrete avenue to consistently redistribute at least 15% of our own revenue that we bring from to support partners across the network. Okay, we can do next slide. Cool. And so the the specific dates change yearly, right? Depending on like changes that are made within the Food Justice Fund advising group. But generally, this is what the timeline of the Food Justice Fund looks like. So, in January, we select new members to the Leadership Council. In February, the Food Justice Fund leaders determine funding priorities and finalize the grant application. So we do a lot of work making sure that the application is as accessible as possible. And then folks in the leadership team of the Food Justice Fund go through it and give us all their awesome nitpicky thoughts about how we can make it better. Then the application is launched and folks are able to access it through their own devices, through the Onondaga County libraries, and we're able to offer grant application support, which if folks are wanting direct support, you can contact Renee at servefoodalliance.org. Renee is not part of the Food Justice Fund Leadership Council, so she's able to provide support without having any influence on the final outcomes of who does and does not get awarded. And then the Food Justice Fund leaders review and rank all the grant applications. In early April, we reconvene as the Food Justice Fund Leadership Council to review the applications, discuss, and we really like start thinning like which applications meet the funding priorities, which don't, and then internal determinations are made for track 2 if it's relevant, and then applications finalists are sent off to community voting, which starts in April. So community voting goes for around 2 weeks. Folks can vote from their personal devices or again at the Onondaga County Public Libraries. And then the process ends in late April with gathering grant, which actually this year is in May. So this is a little bit later of a timeline, but in May we have Gathering Grant, where all of the finalists come together. We bring in funders to allow for networking opportunities, and it's the final opportunity for folks to vote, and then we announce who the grantees are. And so while not all finalists are able to be awarded directly through the Food Justice Fund, the Gathering Grant is a really great opportunity for all finalists to be connected to alternative sources of funding. And in the past, we've been really successful at connecting folks. And I think most people that have been finalists, regardless of whether they were awarded through the fund, were able to get connected with funding either through us or through different funding streams. And then finally, in October is the Food Justice Gathering. And this is really like one of the primary reporting mechanisms of this grant. So unlike other grants where you have to like tick off so many boxes and do really like resource intensive reporting, for this, we really want to like see your pictures and we want to hear your stories. And the Food Justice Gathering is the place where we hear your stories. So we invite Food Justice Fund awardees to join us at the gathering in October and then serve in a panel and share what has emerged from your projects up to that point. So just a really brief overview. Last year, we awarded 7 projects. One project was awarded directly through a track 2, which was alternative project. And all that means is that when we review all the applications, the Food Justice Fund Leadership Council reserves the right to make a small amount of direct awards. Usually, this just happens when there's a project that looks like it will be really impactful for the community, but it doesn't necessarily look as flashy or isn't necessarily as easy to comprehend to the general public. And so the Leadership Council makes the decision to directly award. And then the rest of the projects go off to track 1, which is open to community voting. So track 1 awards from last year were from the Environmental Action Lab, a community garden, St. Peter's and Paul Orthodox Church, who got funding to support their pantry and food distribution, Mesopotamia Market, um, who ran an evening farmers market throughout the summer and fall last year, which was so awesome at the Lodi Triangle on the north side. Salt City Harvest Farm, who used the funding to support their farm workers so that they could um, support the farm's mutual aid efforts to distribute produce through food pantries and ensure that the farmers were compensated. Thrive City Church, who also used funding to support their pantry program and like community support people. Africa Pure, who is doing gardening education and building a cooperative with local farms. And then, as I mentioned, Alternative Project, which is building an online repository of native foodways education. Um, so we loved all the projects that came through last year, and we were happy to see the grant grow from its start in 2024. This year, we're keeping it about even, which is huge considering all of the funding pitfalls that we and other folks experienced in 2025. So we're really proud to be able to maintain the fund into the future. And so for this year, we are going to share funding priorities and funding amounts. And I think you can just go to the next slide. Okay, but we'll start with eligibility. So As always, the project must primarily serve residents of Syracuse, Onondaga County, and or Onondaga Nation. So the serving piece here is really critical. It's okay if your organization isn't necessarily based in the area served, but the audience that is being served needs to be Syracuse, Onondaga County, and or Onondaga Nation. And that needs to be like a primary part of the funding proposal. Um, because of our own tax status, we are only able to offer funding through nonprofit organizations, but we feel really strongly, right, that nonprofit organizations are not the only ones, and are not even the primary folks who are doing important work in the community. And so we really want to encourage folks, even if you don't have your own 501(c)(3) nonprofit status, still apply. You can use a fiscal sponsor, and if you don't have one or don't know of one, we can help support you to connect with one. And that's again an instance where you would email Renee at syrfoodalliance.org. So please, please, please don't be deterred by the 501(c)(3) nonprofit status or lack thereof in order to put in your application. Or if you're advising other folks to put in applications, please encourage them to apply anyway, and we'll deal with the fiscal sponsorship pieces as they come up. And then excitingly, because we're on our third year of this program, um, we get to think about like who is or isn't eligible to apply that has applied in the past. And so the Food Justice Fund Leadership Council has made a decision that um, grantees from the previous year of funding aren't eligible to apply, but grantees 2 years back are, which means that if you applied for funding in 2025, or if you were awarded funding in 2025, you are ineligible to apply in 2026. But if you were awarded funding in 2024, you can reapply, and keep moving that project forward. Okay, next slide. Okay, so for funding priorities, these change a little bit every year. And this year we've added a little bit more like definition and nuance to these to make sure that folks have as clear of an understanding of what these mean. If if your project exists outside of these priorities, still submit. We can figure out what to do, but these priorities are pretty broad. And so I feel it's quite likely that most food justice oriented projects can fit into these categories. So just try your best to see what feels resonant. The funding priorities for 2026 are civic engagement. Um, that sounds kind of nebulous, but what we're really looking for are projects that empower residents to shape food and farm policy decisions, projects that build leadership skills so community members can advocate for equitable food access, and projects that strengthen connections between residents and public officials to advance food systems change. So these can be like educational workshops, they can be trainings, anything that is really looking to connect civic society or just like, regular people in the community with avenues for advocacy. Then we have community gardens and access to land for growing. And we're really looking for expanded opportunities for community members to grow their own food and share harvests. We want to increase access to safe, welcoming, and accessible space for gardening and gathering, and support new and emerging growers in building skills, infrastructure, and long-term land access. And so here we're really looking at like within the city, we can be talking about community gardens, but we can also be talking, right, more in terms of like more formal farmland, or other projects that aren't just community garden focused, but are really looking to grow skills for growers, and connect folks with access to growing space. Then we have environmental justice and sustainability. Um, one of the things that was like big in our discussion was around reducing food waste and redirecting food surplus to the benefit of the community. Um, but also within that, climate resilient growing practices and environmental stewardship, as well as support for composting, soil health, and other sustainable food system solutions. So any connection of like food and environmental impacts, whether it's within the gardens, whether it's in the food system, more largely is fair game for this category. Transportation includes improving transportation options that connect people to grocery stores, farms, food programs, um, things that bring food directly into neighborhoods, like through mobile markets or delivery programs, um, and initiatives that help community members overcome transportation barriers to access healthy food, which, right, like an example of this in the past, organizations have used funding to connect people to rides to get to grocery stores, um, and stuff like that. But it can look a lot of different ways. And then we have food access and affordability. So here we're looking to increase the availability of affordable, healthy, and culturally relevant foods. Um, so like the Mesopotamia market that was funded last year is a great example of this. It created a little setting for vendors to share either culturally appropriate or culturally relevant produce that they were growing or already prepared foods within the context of a community that needed some of that access to those things. We're also looking to improve community access to welcoming, dignified food programs and services, and expand food options in neighborhoods that currently have limited options. And then finally, capacity building and training. Um, right? This is a category that might be like less flashy to the public, but we're really thinking like, what are the supports that folks need organizationally to carry out their work? So this can be strengthening the skills, leadership, and sustainability of the organization by supporting folks within it or the organization at large, providing training that strengthens grassroots organizations' internal capacity and builds community skills. Um, yep, and just helping community leaders build the skills and knowledge needed to grow their impact. Um, and with that, I'm going to pass it off to Maura.
All right. Thanks, Micah. And I get to talk about money. So this slide helps to sort of outline what is in what we call the pot for the Food Justice Fund for 2026. So as Micah mentioned during their introduction, from every grant that SOFSA receives over $50,000, a minimum of 15% is regranted through this or other mechanisms that SOFSA has for regranting. So we have two grants over $50,000 right now that have contributed to the fund. So those are the Kellogg Foundation grant and the Central New York Community Foundation grant. So you can see those amounts. Last year's Food Justice Fund leaders decided to reserve $7,250 from last year's pot to help seed fundraising for this year and future years. We raised a total of $10,250 through Plant a Seed with SOFSA, which is our annual campaign. That also includes the match from Onondaga County Agriculture Council. So for every dollar donated to SOFSA's Plant a Seed campaign, that is matched dollar for dollar by the Onondaga County Agriculture Council, and 75% of the funds raised through that campaign go toward the Food Justice Fund. And then we additionally had a contribution. This is really exciting. This is the first year we've had something like this, where another partner is utilizing the Food Justice Fund as a mechanism for regranting their own funds. So Hope Print and Haven Community Garden received a grant from New York Ag and Markets that's focused on community gardens. So they are putting forward $2,000 from that pot, or $2,000 toward the pot for the Food Justice Fund. And that will be specifically for some kind of community garden or urban agriculture project that's ultimately funded. So of the total available funds of 39,000, the Food Justice Fund leaders decided to reserve $7,000. We're going to work on a high yield investment opportunity for that, for this short term 1 year, to try to grow that dollar amount to be at least $10,000 toward next and future years grant making. And there are $32,000 available to be distributed in 2026. That will go to up to 15 finalists under track 1 that will be advanced to a public vote, and that's how those grants will be decided. And then, as Micah mentioned, there's also track 2, where the Leadership Council has the right to directly award up to 5 grants that they think may not, that rise in their priority level for some reason or another. And so that's the trust-based process that, this group may select up to 5 grants to be directly awarded. All right, so before we get into the grant application, I just want to pause and see if there's any questions, because we just threw a lot at you. We'll also have like open-ended question and answer at the end. All right, hearing none, I'm going to continue. So now to the grant application itself. And I'll navigate to these slides in just a second. But there are 2 different pieces that I just wanted to alert you to before we go into the application itself. The first is the homepage for the Food Justice Fund, which I put in the chat earlier, that has both the grant application, it will have the recording for this session, that will go up hopefully sometime tomorrow. We'll have the recording up for everybody. And then there's also the sample ballot. And I think this is also helpful for folks as you're thinking about, like, how am I going to put a project forward that might be enticing to the public, right? You want to think about that, yes, you're trying to make your case to this small council of leaders who are making the decisions, but you also want to think about what is the public facing version of this, and how do I want to be making my case to folks who may not be as like in the weeds of food justice on their day-to-day, but just excited about this work. So let me walk through the application.
Can I make a very quick plug?
Please.
So to that end, like looking at the 2025 SOFSA ballot is super helpful. And in the FAQ on that servefoodalliance.org/FJF page, there's a question that offers some tips in terms of how to frame that description. It's like there's literally a question, you'll see as Mara goes through it, that asks for a description of your project. We'll fine tune it, but the more that you can rep your project, the better.
Thanks, Micah. Okay, I'm going to actually walk you through the application itself. So if you go to the FJF page, you're going to click on the button for grant application. Can you still see what I'm doing? Yes? Okay, good. All right, and it will open this lovely form, which is probably too small, so I'm going to try to zoom in for you. Ah, yes. How's that? Better? Good? Okay.
You do a little bit bigger.
A little bit bigger.
That's great.
Okay.
Thank you.
So this is mostly the information we've talked about, including hello, welcome, you're here to the info session, and application assistance, which we also talked about at the county library, any of the county library branches, as well as from Renee. Okay. So your very first question is to come up with a project title. Now, you are able to save this as a draft. And so if that is, like it is often for me, the last thing you want to write, you can save a draft and come back to your project title. But your project title is what's going to be on your public ballot. It's going to be the first thing that people see. So you really want it to capture your project. You don't want to name your organization in it. You want to say what it is that your project is doing, and have it be an attention-grabbing title. So again, in last year's ballot, you can see some of the examples. Then your project location. This is a little bit of a techie question, so I just want to show you how it actually works. So I'm going to type in SOFSA's office address, 324 University Avenue, right? And then I actually have to click this to populate it. So you have to click the address once it's populating. So it's just, it was confusing to a couple people last year, so I'm just walking it through. This is where you're going to put the applicant or organization name. So again, if you are applying under a 501c3 organization, you should put that here. If you're not yet a 501c3, you should put the individual or the business or whatever else. And then assuming that there is a charitable purpose behind your grant application, I'm sure we can find a 501c3 not-for-profit organization that's willing to sponsor it. It's just a matter of doing that work together to find somebody who's willing to do that. So then you're going to say where you are, right? My organization is recognized by the IRS as a 501c3. My organization is not yet recognized. I'll be applying under a fiscal sponsor, or my organization is under review. So there are some folks, can be a very lengthy period, especially right now, for that approval. So there's something called provisional status. So that's just a third option. It will apply in very rare circumstances. If you've clicked the option number 2 here, that you're applying under a fiscal sponsor, you have the opportunity to name that fiscal sponsor. But if you select that option and leave this blank, then we'll be supporting you to find someone, assuming you are selected for an award. This is where whoever is going to be the primary contact person, when we say, hey, your project has been named a finalist, we want you to review your public ballot and make sure there are no errors before it goes live tomorrow. Are you the right person? So that is the contact information of the human being we want here for their name, email, and phone number. If you have existing social media, you can share those here. And we do have another exciting thing that's coming down the pike, which will be that finalists will also have the opportunity to have a little short training with Micah on how to elevate their projects and utilize their social media or create new social media so that they can. So this is just another way to sort of elevate the audiences that we're seeing. This is a question that joined the application as a request from last year's Food Justice Fund leaders to share the organization's overall annual budget. This is, again, to sort of just level set and help understand what are the different organizations that are applying. Is this a teeny tiny little grassroots initiative that is actually just beginning and getting started, and maybe you have a $500 budget for last year or this year, or maybe zero, right? Or are you an organization that's well established for 50 years that has 100 staff members? We want to sort of know, and that will help the Food Justice Fund leaders sort of categorize different projects and make sure there's a mix, and certainly that small organizations are being looked at not like they're professional grant writers, but that they're folks looking for funding on that grassroots level. This is the Food Justice Fund priorities for this year. Micah just went through those. So there are 2 questions about the priorities. The first, question 11, asks which of the priorities your project incorporates. So this is a multiple choice question, right? So you can say, okay, my project is civic engagement and transportation and capacity building. Oh, I guess you can select as many as 3 right now. So the instructions and the tech don't match. I will fix that. Apologies, but you will be able to select as many as you wish. But this is the multiple. How many does your project hit upon? And then of all of the priorities, which is the one primary? Okay, if I had to pick just one, it's going to be civic engagement or whatever it is. So that intends to help sort of bridge the gap between only being able to choose the one primary where your project might touch upon others, but also sort of forces you to select one that really is at the heart of what your project is proposing. This short overview, question 13, is one of the most important questions of the whole application. It's also the one that's likely to take the most effort because it is the one long form question. So we recommend about 5 to 8 sentences. Certainly some folks write a lot longer, and that's okay. But I think short and concise and really high impact is really what you're going for here. Again, the ballot has some examples, and the frequently asked questions page has some suggestions. But you should be thinking about including your project's goals, the timeline, the specific need the project is addressing, and the lasting impact the project will have. So those are some of the things you should be noting there. I'll say that, in the age of AI can be a powerful tool for supporting grant making, but you need a human touch. And I think that without a human touch, it won't read as strong as it will without like deep investment from whoever is authoring it. So think of AI as a tool, but not a crutch if you decide to use it. And definitely make sure that you are reviewing and making sure that there's not any sort of hallucination that you're not actually committing to. You want to be standing behind this project description wholeheartely when you click submit. For question 14, you're going to select any of the community or communities that your project is likely to benefit. And I'm going to check 3 right now and make sure, okay, you can select more than 3 here. So you'll be able to select as many of these as you want, including other. And if you select other, a question will appear that will ask you to name who is missing from this list that you think you're serving. You'll then request the amount of funding that you need for this project. You don't need the $, you don't need decimal points or cents or anything like that. You want this number to be, it must be less than or equal to $5,000, but we want it to really reflect that your project is a good value. So while certainly some projects have been funded at the full $5,000 level, I think we've also seen that both the Food Justice Fund leaders and the public at large are really interested in making sure that like the dollars are going where the dollars are needed. And so there's a big, it's not like your traditional funding opportunity where somebody says you can apply for up to $25,000, and what they really mean is apply for $25,000. This fund is actually, you can apply for up to $5,000 and apply for what you need, right? And show us that this is a good value of investment, because your project is stacking up alongside others, and it's not being reviewed by philanthropy with oodles and oodles of money to give away. It's really folks thinking, I like to think of it more like folks are going grocery shopping and trying to find good value at the grocery store, not that they have oodles of money and they're just trying to find ways to figure out how to give it away. So it's a little bit different. Question 16 asks you to talk about how the funds will be used. So how did you get to the number that you put in question 15? There's a detailed example this year of sort of how you might break down what the funds are. So, what are the people costs? What supplies might you need? What other types of costs? And we do want you to include, if you expect to use a fiscal sponsor, most fiscal sponsors charge between 5 and 10%. So if you're planning to use a fiscal sponsor, make sure you include that fee. You can also include indirect if needed, or overhead. But again, folks are going to be evaluating value for money, and so you want to keep things as reasonable as possible across all of your budget categories. Question 17 is about whether you're willing to accept partial funding with a minimum of $1,000. This is, again, as a result of the voting. There have been for the last 2 years and are likely to be again, sort of random remainders at the end of voting. And so what happens is that sort of once each of the top ranking projects is fully funded, there's this final project that is able to be partially funded. And so the question is, if you were that place on the voting list, would you accept $1,000, or is my project can't proceed with just $1,000? So the answer is no. And again, there is an option to click other and say something more if there's something more detailed that you want to offer. Then you're going to upload a photo representing your project. This is a fairly simple, click to upload a file or drag and drop one there. You want something that sort of epitomizes what it is that your project is accomplishing. It could be something that is artistic in nature. We had a couple of different projects sort of do like sketches or icons last year, not just photographs of something that already exists, but like a vision board almost of what they're thinking of. That's also welcome, but some sort of image. I guess it says photo here, but an image is fine of any kind. But you are granting SOFSA permission to use that image in the ballot and in our social media promoting the project. Question 20 is new this year and optional, but we wanted to give folks the Food Justice Fund leaders wanted to give folks the opportunity to talk about how different projects might respond to the current political, economic, or environmental moment. So this is completely optional. It won't disadvantage anyone if you choose not to apply, but if there's something that feels relevant to you that you really want the Leadership Council, and I'll go through sort of which questions are seen by the public versus which questions are seen by just the leaders. So this is one of those confidential questions that if you're like, I actually really want just the Leadership Council to know that actually we've had drastic funding cuts and this is our opportunity to do this one thing that we had planned to do for a really long time and suddenly the carpet was pulled out from under us. Or there's something urgent happening environmentally in the region that we're trying to serve, and that's the why here. So it could be something that's confidential. It could be something that is just really, really important that couldn't be covered elsewhere in the proposal. So use that space how you wish to talk about how you might be responding to the moment, or if that doesn't feel relevant to you, you can skip that question. And then as Micah said, prior year grantees, now 2024 grantees are now eligible to apply for funding again this year. So if you were a prior grantee, you would select yes. And a new question would appear that asks about how the proposal builds on, deepens, or evolves the work previously supported by the Food Justice Fund. Because again, that was of interest to the leaders, that they want to say, if you're getting repeat funding, tell us how this is more different, bigger, but or involves some kind of learning from the prior grant. And then this is was implemented last year, but again, trying to sort of level the playing field, thinking about how much grant writing experience the person who wrote most of this application has. So we recognize that there's different levels of writing experience, especially for grants, which are a very particular type of grant of writing expertise that not everybody has practiced before. And so we want to know, is this your first time applying for a grant, or are you a professional grant writer? Where along that spectrum are you? And that sort of just helps the Food Justice Fund leaders to understand sort of what is it that they are reading and how experienced is the person who wrote it. This is a question just for us about how you heard about the funding opportunity, just so we know how our outreach is working. And then these are a couple of things that you have to sign off on, saying that I recognize that the project serves the residents of Syracuse-Onondaga County or Onondaga Nation. If selected as a grantee, no member of this year's Food Justice Fund Leadership Council will be a direct financial beneficiary of the proposed project. And if selected as a grantee, we will provide a valid tax ID number for a nonprofit organization that will accept the awards, either your own or a fiscal sponsor. And then you're also signing off on the 3 reporting requirements, which are, if selected as a grantee, we will offer a story about the success of our project to be shared at the Food Justice Gathering. If selected as a grantee, I will share 3 to 5 photos of my photos or videos of my project with the SOFSA network. And if selected as a grantee, I will complete a brief awardee survey to help improve the process for next year. And then you will write your name. And it says ready to use. And so then you say use it. You can also choose to draw your signature, but you say use signature. And that will enable you to click submit. But you have to either click draw signature or use signature before you can click submit, because this is a required question. And like I said, you can save a draft And then you just need to copy this link and put it somewhere for safekeeping, and then you can return to your draft and click submit at a later date if you need to keep working on it. So let's see. Should I also walk through the ballot, Micah? Would that be helpful? Just so folks could see what that looks like.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Wesley says yes. I love the enthusiasm. All right. So here is the sample ballot. This is last year's ballot. The voting has ended. I'm going to use the sample ballot. Yes, I recognize that this is just a preview. So this is sort of how projects looked. You can sort of see the different versions of the finalists from last year. And then you can say, okay, I'm going to fill it's called knapsack voting. Again, grocery bag, grocery cart, backpack, knapsack, whatever you want to call it. And then, oops, I have $37.50 left, and the remaining projects put me over my budget. So I would have to submit. You're sort of building your budget however you want, but there's no way, almost no way to get to the exact amount in the pot. And that's where those remainders that we talked about come in, where you're saying, am I willing to accept partial funding? That's if we get to this point where there's $37.50 left. Okay, that might go to a project that was actually asked for $5,000. And then you would click submit my vote. But you can sort of see how they show up. So there's the project title, the description, the applicant is included, and then the budget breakdown. And then there's obviously the photo there.
Yeah. So a couple of things that I'll just break in to point out is notice that for all of the applications, there's like the description, and then in order to see the budget breakdown, you have to click read more. So when you're, again, submitting that description of your project, put yourself in the shoes of somebody who's going through this voting, and like, how likely are they to actually click read more, right? And so many folks probably will, and some folks probably won't. So you really want to make sure that your description captures the essence of what your project is doing. And right, doesn't like it's not the budget, but last year we did encounter projects that we were like, even within the Food Justice Fund Leadership Council, we were like, what exactly is it that they're trying to do with this money? And so if it's confusing for us, it's going to be confusing to the public. And, it turns out that project did not get funded, right? So if it's helpful, like put together a project description, ask somebody else to read over it who isn't in the weeds of your project and be like, if you read this, what do you think that we're trying to do? And make sure that there's cohesion there. Because yeah, you don't really have a lot of space, and people are people and will read through this quite fast. Also, if possible, submit like a picture that really captures the essence of your project and not like a building.
Great. Thank you, Micah. I am going to just quickly scoot back and go through again sort of what are the public portions versus what is only being reviewed by the Leadership Council, the FJFLC. So the actual person's contact information, that's not public information, but the applicant organization is. What the nonprofit status and or fiscal sponsor is will not be included, but the project title will be. The organization's annual budget, that's private information for the Leadership Council to consider. The project location will be included on the map. And so that's where actually asking for an address is helpful. And you really want that address to be sort of the location of the project, not your office necessarily, but like, if you're building a new community garden that's in a remote, a location away from the building where you otherwise operate, that you would want to put the location of the garden in that field. Signing off on the eligibility and reporting criteria, that will be assumed on the public ballot, but won't be published there. Who the communities are impacted, whether or not you're willing to accept partial funding, prior grant writing experience, and how you heard about the funding opportunity are all just for the Food Justice Fund Leadership Council. The priority areas will be seen on the application, the project overview, the funding amount requested, how funds will be used, and the project photo or image will all be available to the public. The one other thing I wanted to mention, because Micah's wonderful break-in made me realize that we didn't say this. Also new this year, we have a due diligence period for the Food Justice Fund leaders. So it is possible that there'll be follow-up questions. So if there's something that wasn't clear in your application when the Food Justice Fund leaders reviewed it, and it's going to make a difference on whether you're selected as a finalist or not, they may come back to you with a question. And so that would be in right around mid-April, and we'll ask for very prompt responses during that time. So if you anticipate not being available at all during the month of April, you might want to put in a contact person who is going to be available for a fast turnaround during the month of April if there are questions that emerge, or to review review the ballot posting if you're selected as a finalist, all of those things. So that's just an important feature. But we don't know what due diligence questions will come up, but we're excited to have sort of that availability to be able to sort of ask back with folks, hey, you said this, but we're not quite clear about what you mean by that particular budget line, or this sentence of your project application. Can you tell us a little bit more? So that will be that sort of ask back period. So key dates, this info session and recording and the materials will be posted tomorrow. The priority deadline to request application assistance from Renee is March 13th, but applications will be open until March 22nd at 5 p.m. And you can go to any library branch up until that time, during their open hours, and a circulation desk librarian will be able to help you with internet accessing the application, troubleshooting anything you might have. They may or may not be able to assist you with the application content itself, because they're not, it depends on who you reach and how excited they are to help you with it. Generally librarians are awesome, love librarians, and it sort of depends on what else is on their plate and how familiar they are with the application, about how helpful they'll be able to be with the content itself, but certainly around the technical aspects, any of the library branches will be able to assist you. And then, as I mentioned, there'll be the notification will be Friday, April 17th. The due diligence period would be leading up to Thursday, the 16th. So there might be a couple of questions in that week leading up to Thursday the 16th that get asked of certain people. It doesn't mean anything good, bad, or ugly whether you're asked a question or not asked a question during that period. It won't be necessarily an indicator one way or the other of if you get a question that you're like in the running, or if you don't get a question you're out. That's unlikely to be the case. But that will be the time frame. And then finally, we have our Gather and Grant Community Dinner, which is an awesome event. We have funders come and share, also hear from the projects and share a little bit about their funding availability and their funding approach. So that will be at Beach and Branch Library on Thursday, May 14th from 5 to 7. And so ideally, your contact person or a member of your team will also be present for that to sort of share about your project if you are a finalist, so that the room can hear, and those funders who are in the room as part of the funder roundtable can hear about your project. And with that, I'm happy to stop sharing and open to any questions or comments you all might have. We have 35 more minutes if you'd like, we can use as much or as little of that as you want.
Hey, Mara. Thank you guys so much for this. This has been so helpful.
Oh, good.
I did have one quick question about timeline for the
Mhm.
project overview. If this is like a continued project that's like already active, how would you like us to approach the timeline when it comes to that, if it's not like a brand new project?
Great question. So I would consider the timeline that you're using the funding, like
Okay.
where these $5,000 will assist you. So what's going to happen during the timeline, and the intention is sort of that the funds will be distributed that first week of June,
Hmm.
and that they should be fully expended within 12 months. There are opportunities for, like, if you need a little bit more time, we can do an extension, and then you just have an additional sort of like point of contact with us to say, okay, now we're really all fully expended. Here's our last photo and last little story. Um, but the intention is that the funds should be spent within 12 months.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Mhm.
Mm. Yeah, that's similar to a question I had because um, I'm working on a lot of different projects that this project basically encapsulates,
Mhm.
because there's so many different overlaps in the things that we do every day, and this actual fund tries to, for me, it brings a lot of it together. So, the process that I'm doing right now, that I've been doing since November, those dates aren't relevant to this project, right? We basically, from June up until next June, those are the dates that you guys want to see what's going on from that moment on, from the funding, the plans that we have to utilize those fundings and all the implementations that the fundings will support from
Yeah.
the, okay.
Yeah, I think a way you could think about it is like, what would happen with these funds that won't happen without them, right?
Mm,
Right? Like, what are the things that this will unlock for your project that you otherwise wouldn't be able to do? And
okay.
so, like, because it's not just general operating support, it's support for a project, right?
Yeah,
And
right,
so,
right.
and I think that that will also help you to sort of make the case in a way that is exciting to somebody else about being like, oh, this is going to happen because of this investment. And if I don't choose this project, it won't, right? And so I think that that might be a way of helping your brain to think through how to frame your
Yeah,
project.
yeah, that definitely helps. Okay, another question. If an aspect of a project is already partially funded and in the process of developing, and the funds that I'm requesting is still needed to complete that, do you put the start date of that project or the completion fund date, saying, okay, we need this to complete from this date on?
I think that's probably a question that you should ask Renee if you're like, I think it
Okay,
seems like very project specific, but so I think that you, again, like, you want to put yourself in the headspace of an under-informed person when it comes to food
okay,
justice, who
okay,
sees your project and they're like, this is one concrete investment that I am making.
okay,
You want to like simplify the language you're using, simplify, you know, you know, it could be something like, we have another funder, and in the process of executing that project, we realized there was a gap. And here's the gap, and here's the way we're going to fill it, and this is what these funds will do, or something like that, right?
okay,
Like that,
okay,
that you're telling the story for someone
okay,
in a way that makes
okay.
it really easy to understand.
That makes 100% sense. Yes.
But if you have specific questions to your project, Renee would be the one to ask that.
Yeah. I would echo everything Maura said and add also that it sounds to me like there's parts of the of this project that you're doing that feel really important to be like this is how this funding will build on this. And so that last question that is optional on the application, that's like, how does your project respond to this moment? That's a place where you can share some of those things that you're like, I feel like this is important and I just want this to like be on the record. Um, but again, really focusing on like for that project description, really looking at the next like 12 months and like how can you make it really digestible to the public?
Great point, Micah. I think use that space as it suits your needs and your circumstances is really, really good advice. Other questions? Okay. All right. Well, we're excited to see your applications and excited to see applications from all the folks out there who are going to watch this video asynchronously. And thank you all for your time today. And if there are questions, we're going to invite you to really look at that frequently asked questions page on SOFSA's website. And then if your questions are still not answered, you can reach out to Renee for support. But the sooner the better for application support. And this is not one of those applications where we're like, oh my gosh, make sure it's submitted at least 24 hours in advance because the portal's going to go down, or, your application's going to get lost. We've tried to think of all of these things. And so our hope is that, like, even if you just make the decision to apply an hour before the deadline, that you can still make it in time. The hope is not to have any barriers for great ideas to make their way into the pipeline for consideration. And so we really want to see all the ideas. And so if you are encountering a barrier of any kind, we'd really love for you to do your best to submit something. And we have that due diligence period to follow up with you. And so just the more applications, the better. We're so excited to see what's out there. All right. Thanks, everybody. We really appreciate you. Bye.
Thanks,
Thank
y'all.
you.